Good evening, everyone. Sound of the bell. Body, breath, and mind in perfect oneness. I send my heart along with the sound of the bell. May the hearers awaken from forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow. Listen, listen. This wonderful sound brings us back to our true home. Good evening. This is the fourth in a lecture series relating to mindfulness in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition. It is July 12th, 2017, and we are at the Southgate Center of the Mindfulness Community of Milwaukee, home of the Stillwater Sangha. In our first talk, we talked about the three people that were important: the Buddha, Thich Nhat Hanh, and ourselves, and how that all manifests. We learned that the Buddha, when he became enlightened, when he saw clearly, had several visions, including that there was a middle path between the extreme of deprivation and from the extreme of overdoing self-care. He also had the idea about the origin of suffering and talked about the Four Noble Truths. And importantly, he said that all conditioned things are subject to decay. Everything that comes together eventually falls apart. We'll come back to that later about tonight as we talk about happiness not being an individual matter, how the real, true Mahayana path is the path of connection. In our second class, we talked about the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, which we said mostly was clinging and ignorance, the fact that suffering can be alleviated, and the path for such an alleviation. And in the third class, of course, we talked about the idea of planting seeds and the seeds of our consciousness and how we might go about dealing with a mindful life so that we can deal with our mental formations in a skillful manner. The good news of the Four Noble Truths was that we can, without anybody else doing things, alleviate our suffering, that we need no outside source, that we need no individual savior, so to speak. We all fall into the same trap, and we all can be liberated the same way. But I need to expand on that because that isn't exactly true. When I say we can do this, I think it is very difficult, if not impossible, to do this by yourself. If nothing else, even if you are practicing by yourself, the way to know true peace, true happiness, is to realize the connection that we have with everyone else. A very famous part of the Thich Nhat Hanh legacy is talking about the piece of paper. We have this piece of paper that has obviously come from multiple sources. The sunshine and the rain and the soil that make the trees. The way that the trees need to be logged, so there's a logger involved in this piece of paper. There is the wheat that the farmer had to grow to make bread so that the logger could function. And a myriad of things like trucks that take paper from the mill to the store, people who do things like marketing, and all of the connections that happen in this world. And when you really come down to it, there are multiple causes of this piece of paper. And if you take any one and take it back to its original source, if we get rid of the sun, the paper does not exist. If we get rid of the cloud that causes the rain, the paper does not exist. If we send a logger back to his parents and he doesn't exist, the paper does not exist. So we say that the paper has an interbeing with all of these things, and when you look at it, it's a very broad and large group of people and substances and actions and energies that create this piece of paper. And in a way, we can say that the paper is made up of entirely non-paper elements. Before the paper was born, so to speak, all of these elements existed and had to come together. And we also know that we can't truly destroy the piece of paper, at least we can't annihilate it so that it doesn't exist. If we take a match to the piece of paper, then we can have smoke and ash and heat that are all coming from the piece of paper. But we don't actually have the destruction. It becomes another form. In this way, we are all coming and going. We are all a multiple sets of causes coming, and then as we leave, we become other things. And it's very easy to see this, I think, or easier to see this in a piece of paper or in this particular cup or the bell or a car or a building or a cushion. We can see multiple things coming together. We have a little bit more difficulty when we start looking at people that way. But yet, the rules still apply. We, as people, are made up of multiple causes, multiple things and multiple energies. In this way, we inter-are with the rest of existence. So if you take away your mother and your father, you don't exist. But not only that, your upbringing, your education. What kinds of things did you read? What kinds of music did you listen to? Who were your friends? Where did you grow up? All of these things are part of who you are. And if you take away any part of that, you, as you presently observe yourself, cease to exist. Something else might be there, but it is always a situation where there are multiple causes and conditions. You are one of those things that when the Buddha says, all conditioned things, we are a conditioned thing. And all conditioned things fall apart. I very much like the idea of a human being. We are constantly being. In a way, it looks a little bit more like being a verb rather than a noun. In the period of time that I am talking here, millions and millions of cells in my body have died, and millions of cells have been replaced. It is said that for most of our structures in our body, every 7 years or so, everything is replaced. So you don't have the same, for example, intestinal system or heart muscle or anything else that you had 7 years ago. It's all been gradually replaced bit by bit. We are constantly in the way of becoming, and we are constantly in the way of going. In that way, we can see that there is no fixed identity for us. The identity that we have that also is what is happening right here is now gone in the next moment. And that is now gone. And so we are almost a series of these individual selves, all one evolving into another. And they have no specific standard substance. The Buddha took this as a way of looking at life that was a little bit different than his contemporaries, who believed very much in a small kernel of soul called the Atman. And so we often talk about the no self thing as being the Atman. There is no self. Everything is always in flow, always coming and going. There is no one thing that stays fixed. But more importantly, our relationship to others is vitally important. Whether we like to think of it or not, we are at least physically connected to all the other people in the planet. Right now in your body are 50 molecules that belonged to the Buddha. We know this, geeky people make these kinds of things. And 50 molecules that belonged to Jesus Christ or Genghis Khan or Napoleon. All of these kinds of things have been going on for a very, very long time. There's lots of physical interconnection. But even more than that, we talk about the consciousness, the mind consciousness that we talked about last week. We know that it is really a collective consciousness. The example is, I am giving this talk in English. Those of you who are hearing this in English and understand it are all part of that collective consciousness called English consciousness. I am in the United States of America and have grown my entire way as an American, and I have that kind of consciousness. I am also male and a Dharma teacher and a lot of other things that all kind of come along with that. And each of those things is constantly in flux. Each of those kinds of things are changing. It probably means quite a bit to be what an American is in 2017 versus being an American in, say, 1917. Even now, as we're talking about things, we realize that the ideas about just being human in general is evolving as we have evolved into this particular era called the Anthropocene, where man is the driving force on the world. And the world, of course, is all part of an interaction too. The atmosphere is our lungs, and the oceans are our blood. But it is difficult for us, even as we see that we are a piece of paper and that we have no self. We have a really difficult time really appreciating that. I have come across so many people who say, you know, intellectually I understand what it is, but I still feel like I have a self. I still feel very much that selfing that goes on all the time. Well, it is a bit of a burden. So I misspoke perhaps a little bit last week when I said that you are the person that can really achieve your liberation. And while that wasn't really untrue, one of the ways that you can achieve your liberation is to realize your connection with all beings, all sentient beings and all non-sentient beings, all parts of the universe, and see that your connections. Humanity in general has been always a bit of a collective organism, but much, much more so in the modern age. We are more like a hive of bees or a colony of ants than we ever have been. And what someone does over on the other side of the globe definitely affects us. Perhaps that wasn't true 200, 300, 400 years ago, and certainly may not have been true 100,000 years ago, but it is very true today. We are a collective organism. We have met the enemy and he is us. And the longer we go trying to defend and do things for the individual self, the more we will suffer. So, not exactly correct to say that you alone can take care of your suffering and that you can achieve liberation. But you can connect with everybody as part of that process to achieve liberation. If nothing else, your store consciousness will always be part of a longer and larger consciousness, and that way you can kind of connect. So how do we go about doing this? What is one of the methods that are, or any of the methods that we can do to break out of this defensive ego and being able to connect to everyone else? Since happiness is not an individual matter, how do we connect with all the other people who are also seeking happiness? There's a very wonderful quote that was done by Albert Einstein. Not exactly a Buddhist, but he had a lot of wisdom. A human being is part of a whole, called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts and feelings, as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to the affection for a few persons nearest us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circles of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the nature of whole and its beauty. I like to think of us as having these kind of circles that go out, that right in the middle of the circle is this thing that we identify as me, or I, or ego. And in the next circle is this concept of the people who are close to us, especially children. Our children and our parents, people who are biologically related, very much. And isn't it very natural at times to feel a complete connection with our children? That there is that circle that is there, but we break through that circle. We merge between ourselves and our children. And then maybe on the circle outside of that are our friends and acquaintances, our teachers, people who have done a great deal of good to us. And if we want, we can break through that circle little by little. And then in the other bigger circle might be just people who are just vague acquaintances to us. And in the bigger circle from that might be the people that we see as being difficult people, our enemies, the villains of our lives, which are often not really villains of our lives, of anybody else's life, but they're our own creation. A topic for another talk. And then out beyond that is everyone else. And our practice to widen the circle is to break down that barrier, to see that barrier between ourself and others, and gradually get to the point where we don't see very little difference. We see very little difference between ourselves and others. That it all becomes one great sort of plasma of life that's all affected, that everybody is affecting each other. And this is done mostly by practice. It is mostly done by being mindful, by seeing all of this, by living this particular type of existence, where we can realize that the self is not a concrete thing. It is an illusion. The biggest things, and Albert Einstein said it himself, perhaps the biggest thing that we can get there is compassion. Compassion, which is a root word that means common passion with and suffering, to suffer with, may be the most important of all of our practices. Or any of the other four abodes of love that we call the Brahma Viharas. So we always like to have this idea that we can practice our feelings of compassion, joy, equanimity, and love, and we will be able to have those little barriers between ourselves and others eventually dissolve and merge. But it doesn't happen overnight, and your ego does not go quietly. It will put up a fight and give you hundreds of intellectual reasons and thousands of distractions to keep you from doing this. And yet, you can do this. One of the things you sometimes hear people do is they talk about enlightenment or that sort of thing as being a rare phenomenon. I don't agree. I believe that enlightenment is as common as sunshine. And the thing that happens to us is we can't maintain it. But I think all of us have had some taste of that enlightenment. One of the things that people talk about as a story about enlightenment, a parable, so you will, is enlightenment as uncommon as a turtle swimming in the ocean, happening to pop up his head right between a circle and that particular circle. And, that kind of thing, as if it were, I don't know, the person who wrote this, whether they actually had life preservers back 2,000 years ago. But that's almost how I look at it. And of course, that's absurd that you could do that by yourself. But if you were a turtle and you had lots of other turtles and other people who were pointing it out, you could easily do it. You could have turtles on the lookout for where the life preserver is. You could actually find a way to get to that place. It's almost inevitable that you could actually do it with the help of all of your good, special spiritual friends. This is what is meant by Sangha. This is what is meant by community. And this is one of those ways that Thich Nhat Hanh, in particular, is very blessed with. It gives us a lot of blessings and ideas. Thich Nhat Hanh has said that the practitioner without a Sangha is like a tiger without a mountain. That a tiger apparently in Vietnam or in Asia, if it's down in the lowlands, it can be discovered very easily and captured or killed by humans. But if it is in the mountain, it can hide and continue to hunt and live a vigorous life. So we need the protection of our Sangha. While it is not, I think, impossible to go alone, and I know many people have tried, I don't know very many people that have had success, and I doubt that they can really get to the deepness that you can get when you practice with Sangha. And however Sangha is for you, if it's a community like ours, or if it isn't, you can just find that sort of thing by, especially in the modern age, by various electronic media, but also just putting things up on bulletin boards and connecting. But do connect as much as you can. And once you get to that point, perhaps you can realize the beauty and the practice of life. I wanted to, I mentioned in the first class the idea of the Five Remembrances and how there was this idea, I am of the nature to grow old, I am of the nature to be ill, I am of the nature to die, I am of the nature to be separated from things around me, and I inherit the results of my actions in body, speech, and mind. That was the idea of suffering. I'd like to present the idea of well-being in this particular way, and realizing that your Sangha can help you in all of these particular things. That we can rewrite the Five Remembrances. I am of the nature to be young. I can bloom like a flower. I am of the nature to be healthy. There is more right with me than wrong with me. I am of the nature to be born. I can choose to be reborn in every breath. All that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. May they grow and develop. They are always in my heart. And I inherit the results of my actions in body, speech, and mind. My peace of mind is related to the seeds I choose. May I be a good gardener. So Thich Nhat Hanh has given us the template of seeds as how we may cultivate, like we cultivate a garden. We can cultivate our happiness. But realizing it's a collective consciousness, we must also cultivate in other people as well. So last week I gave the little bit of and I'll go over them once again. I talked about the first 4 of the 8 ways to water the seeds of our consciousness to live a happy life. And the first is to water the seeds of mindfulness when any other seeds enter your mind consciousness, but especially unwholesome ones. It is really peculiar that this very simple practice of paying attention can be so powerful, that we can regulate our emotions so completely just by paying attention. And yet we can. And again, it's easier to do this when you have good friends. Water wholesome seeds. We need to make a practice of that. We need to keep a register in our consciousness. I actually keep them on file cards of good wholesome seeds, i.e. things about our consciousness that we enjoy, or events that have happened to us, or feel those connections. Refrain from watering unwholesome seeds. Don't go to places, situations where you will have anger, fear, and anxiety. It is perfectly permissible in the Thich Nhat Hahn tradition to back away from a difficult conversation, to not extend ourselves in places where we might have our unwholesome seeds watered. And the 4th one is, from time to time, when things are safe, invite our unwholesome seeds up, like inviting your anger or fear to tea. And these are all things that we do for ourselves. And of course, they're very important. They're really the bedrock of a lot of our practice. But I'd like to talk about numbers 5 through 8 tonight, and talk a little bit about what those kinds of other seed waterings might be. The first is, we can water wholesome seeds in others. We can give people confidence and joy. We can connect with our friends, our family, and maybe not even, and even beyond that, maybe we can break through those circles that Einstein talked about and connect with a lot of other things. The world definitely needs watering of wholesome seeds. And although we definitely should pay attention to watering wholesome seeds in ourselves, we should water wholesome seeds in others. We should help others achieve that joy and happiness. The 6th one is, refrain from watering unwholesome seeds in others. We cannot allow ourselves to become trapped in the fear and anxiety and lash out. There are very good, skillful means that other people have talked about how to communicate so that you don't water the unwholesome seeds in others. But that is one of those other things that we can definitely make an appointment in our life to do. The 7th is very interesting. Ask others to water your wholesome seeds. Isn't that surprising? I think that's one of the ones that we all fall down on. We don't ask people. We sometimes may ask people for help. We sometimes may ask people to have a conversation with us. But we seldom ask people to water our wholesome seeds. And we need it. And we need it at times. I have a peculiar sort of thing with my partner, Jane, where I'll sometimes say, Jane, I need my wholesome seeds watered, which always sounds a little bit odd if you're somebody from the outside listening to that. But that's really very much part of this consciousness, is to water not just your wholesome seeds, but not just the wholesome seeds in others, but have other people water your wholesome seeds. They will do it if you ask. The other one is, ask others to refrain from watering your unwholesome seeds. The idea of anger and fear, of course, should be in others, should be met in skillful means. but to avoid those kinds of situations which seem sort of fruitless and counterproductive. Avoid those fractious moments that it doesn't seem that there's any kind of resolution. This does not say that we shouldn't have a great deal of compassion and do some deep listening when we can. But there are times for that, and there are other times just to realize that we need to keep others from watering our unwholesome seeds. That's a very brief way of looking at this. So we do these practices and we become awakened and we sit on a seat of no self. In order to be a genuine student of the Buddha, in order to give a Dharma talk at all, according to the Buddha, it must have what are called the 3 Dharma seals, which is also a great name for a circus act if that ever happens, but the 3 Dharma seals. The first is the idea of impermanence, which is the idea, of course, noticing the piece of paper, the building, the cushion, and even such concepts as things like democracy and governments, that all of these things are impermanent. The second seal is the seal of no self, which, as I say, is also a way of connecting with other people, but is a little bit difficult for people. But all teachings of the Buddha have the seal of no self. And the third seal is called the seal of Nirvana. And what is Nirvana? Nirvana always sounds like some sort of unreal realm, some unattainable place where only very special people could be. In reality, we all can be there. And we all, I think, have been there at various times. Like I say, we don't always hold on to that. But Nirvana is when the ego dissolves and all desire and fear fall apart. And the true boundaries and connections, the boundaries between ourselves and others, are seen to be that illusion. And we all kind of dissolve into each other. It's a wonderful idea and a wonderful practice, and it takes many years of diligence to do that. But I'm certain that we all can touch Nirvana more and more. As I say, most of us have had at some moment in our life, even those who have not been much practitioners, where everything seemed just right and that everything seemed to be perfect in regard to our relationship to others and nature. It is always perfect, we just don't realize that. Your discomfort is caused by the fact that you are defending this ego. So much of what we do, and first when you start talking about such things as mindfulness practices, mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful sitting, mindful driving, mindful conversation, it always seems very me-related because they're all things that we do in relationship to the world. But it's this kind of thing that starts here. How is that related to the world as in general? How is it related to that concept of no self? I believe that every practice that we take that helps us become realized is a practice of no self. And even when it doesn't appear that that's where it's going, if you practice long enough and diligently enough, you will get there. I also believe that all of the practices that you might think of as no self are actually things that help you as the individual. While you do not have a permanent self, of course, you have this transitory thing that is passing through. And the universe, quite frankly, wishes to take care of you. I think we should allow that to all to happen. So once we get into this connection, it will seem relatively seamless, very easy, that we will be able to live in the world of our own and live in the world of no self or nirvana. I do also believe that happiness is not an individual matter, that the way that we do that is to develop connection. And the way we develop connection is continue to practice. So what will happen if we get to that point? There's a famous story about Thomas Merton, who was crossing the street in Louisville, Kentucky in 1959. And he had been studying for a while many of these things. He was a Trappist monk, but he had just been studying a lot of contemplative practices, both in and out of the Christian condition. And he was right in the middle of the intersection when it all came to him in a flash, and he realized that. Somebody who was with him was very nice to get him out of the intersection, so if nothing else, he could come home and write this particular little paragraph about what happened there. It is a glorious destiny to be a member of the human race. Now I realize what we all are, if only they could see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, no more greed. I suppose the big problem would be we would all fall down and worship each other. Isn't that a nice thought? Once we can see the great humanity in this. It really is true. We are all Buddhas. And you know, once you realize that everyone's a Buddha, it's really hard to be nasty to them. It's really hard to be angry with them. It's really hard to be able to see them as other than these wonderful creatures that interact with us. The greatest gift that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about is the gift of non-fear. This is the deep practice of getting together and understanding everything, understanding our connections. And I wish that gift of if one person who is watching this eventually ends up with non-fear, I will consider this a great success. I want to leave with a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh with a commentary on the phraseology in there. Thich Nhat Hanh, as many of you know, besides being a Dharma teacher and a monk, is a poet. He actually has a great deal of insight in his poetry, and this is one of my favorites here. It's called Our True Heritage. The cosmos is filled with precious gems. I want to offer a handful of them to you this morning. Each moment you are alive is a gem, shining through and containing earth and sky, water and clouds. It needs you to breathe gently for the miracles to be displayed. Suddenly you hear the birds singing, the pines chanting, see the flowers blooming, the blue sky, the white clouds, the smile, and the marvelous look of your beloved. You, the richest person on earth, who have been going around begging for a living, stop being the destitute child. Come back and claim your heritage. We should enjoy our happiness and offer it to everyone. Cherish this moment. Let go of the stream of distress and embrace life fully in your arms. Haven't we been that way? We have been living the life of a destitute child. We feel powerless, and we feel that the world is oppressing us. We feel as if that tiger is chasing us or the runaway truck is right about to run us over. We have a choice here. We don't have to be the destitute child. We can be, as Thich Nhat Hahn says, the richest person on earth. Isn't that a lovely idea? We don't have to do anything but practice to achieve that. So, if I can ever inspire you to practice, I don't think I can make you the richest person on earth, just like I can't make you a Buddha. But I can make you realize that you are the richest person on earth and that you are a Buddha. What a wonderful idea this precious human birth is. What a wonderful way that we all are. And I hope we can uplift together in this particular life. Happiness is not an individual matter. And I hope we will all strive brilliantly and beautifully into the future. Dear friends, a lotus to you, Buddhas that you are.